Hi, this is Simone Buna from Barefoot Medicine. Today I'm going to be looking at stress and how it could be affecting your health and your quality of life. So we all know that there's different levels of stress and not all of it is bad. So to some extent we need stress, we need some kind of stimulation to wake us up in the morning, to get us out of bed feeling lively and refreshed. And when we're in a good state, our mind is alert and our body feels refreshed and ready to go. But we still have the ability to sit calmly and relax if necessary. When we need to ramp it up a little bit, that's the kind of more optimal stress for the performance. So it could be when you're at work that you want to be a little bit more alert, a little bit faster to respond and faster on the uptake. So our muscles tend to be a little bit more taut, our mind is more agile, our heart rate is a little bit more raised, but it's really just a temporary thing. We need to be able to switch that on while we're at work and then come home in the evenings and just relax. Where this goes a little bit awry is when we are under stress for prolonged periods of time. And that's when our body is overreacting to too much stress and prolonged periods of stress and doesn't necessarily have the ability to switch off when we would want it to. Let's have a look what happens in our stress response system. So here's a little diagram that shows when our brain, in fact it's our hypothalamus, receives a signal that there's some sort of stressor coming in. So it could be that your boss has walked in, it could be that the children are screaming, it could be that you've got lots of deadlines to meet. So that stimulates a hormone from your thyroid gland called ACTH, that's a thyroid hormone that signals your kidneys to produce adrenaline and cortisol, and that gets you ready for action, ready to respond to whatever it may be. So when the adrenal glands kick in and start producing these hormones, something's got to give. We can't have everything in our body working all the time. And so, for example, our digestive system and our stomach start to take it easy a bit, because when you're in a stressed situation, that means that there is a danger, there is something that you need to be alert to. So it's not a good time to sit and digest your food, which means that there are fewer digestive hormones going to be produced, and the transit of food through your digestive system gets a bit more sluggish. So perhaps something to think about if you're the sort of person who sits at the office having their lunch at their desk. That's quite a stressful environment, and you're not really going to be digesting your food and getting the goodness out of it when you do that. The other thing that needs to happen, of course, is if you're in an emergency situation, your heart rate has to increase because it's got to pump all the goodness and all the energy around your body as quickly as possible. So your heart rate increases and your blood pressure rises because we've got to get it all out to the areas where the nutrients might be needed. So the muscles, for example, in case you've got to run away. But where's all this energy coming from? Well, let's look at the liver activity here on the bottom left. The liver is really fantastic at storing fat and then releasing it in a hurry when we really need to call upon our reserves. And so there's a knock-on effect on the insulin in our body and our body's ability to extract as much energy as possible from anything that we've got stored or from anything we've eaten. We just need to get at that energy very quickly. And of course, there's our lungs. Now, when anybody's stressed, they do tend to start breathing more noticeably, let's put it that way. And that's because, of course, we need to pump oxygen around our bodies and get it to the cells. So what does this mean? What do we see on the outside? Well, everybody's familiar with the fight or flight response. There's also, of course, freeze, which is when we can't make a decision about whether to stand and fight or run away. So we'll notice different symptoms around our body. We'll see, for example, different signs around our body. Our mouth will go dry because there's less saliva in our body. So a lot of people talk about being afraid and their mouth going dry. The blood vessels will constrict in your skin, and so people often tend to get cold hands and feet because, of course, all the blood has gone to the vital organs where it's needed. It's gone to your heart, it's gone to your brain, and it goes to your muscles, of course, because you might need, as I say, to run away. So you could start looking a bit pale when you're stressed as well. Your heart beats faster and harder, so you might actually feel that pounding in your chest. Your stomach decreases the digestive enzymes, and so some people get a bit of a stomach ache if they notice that when they're stressed, but it tends to be later that they notice it because the food, as I said before, is still in your stomach. Or, of course, in extreme situations, your body needs to void itself of everything. So some people, when they're afraid, they actually vomit to get rid of anything that they don't want to be carrying around with them. Muscles become more tense because they have to be ready to respond at short notice. So you might notice trembling occurring. You might notice your hands shaking, and that's the muscles in readiness to take action. Your eyes, you'll see that people's pupils dilate when they're stressed, and that's so that they can open and take in as much information as possible. The lungs, quick and deep breathing. Your bowels, the food movement slows down through your bowel, but as I said before, if there's any stool that's ready to leave, then it's going to go out of your body straight away. You often hear people saying, oh, I was scared, or I shat myself because I was scared. That's what's happening. You've got the adrenaline rush, you've got the cortisol, you've got your body saying, I'm in a fight or flight situation, and you just dump any excess baggage and get out of there. And then, of course, the blood pressure increases as all your major vessels dilate. So, what's the purpose of all of this? What's the goal of the stress response? Well, actually, it's really straightforward. In prehistoric times, if we were running away from a saber-toothed tiger, we need a rush of adrenaline. We need an effective blood supply to get the oxygen and the nutrition around to the muscles so that they can get the energy that they need. We're going to focus on the important organs, so the brain, the heart, and the skeletal muscles, and that's for our immediate survival. We also need to increase energy production from the body's stores, and that means we need to optimize something called ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. That's within the cells themselves, and it's a way of getting quick energy, but that comes at the expense of your long-term metabolic functions. So instead of having nice, slow digestion and then gradually getting the food that you need, this is a shortcut. This is ATP saying, I need energy right now. So that production has to increase. And of course, your body will prioritize any life-saving functions, which means that other functions that are less important for the immediate survival will slow down. It's a little bit like an ambulance. If there's an ambulance travelling in an emergency, it uses the same roads as the regular traffic, but it takes priority. So the ambulance is zooming along to where it's got to get to, and the little car that's off to the supermarket to get the nourishment and the food, no, forget your food. That is not important. This is a life-saving situation. Likewise, anything that's going to digest your food, it's not time to sit and digest. Anything, if there's a car in the way that says, something to do with conception and dating and you want to have a baby, all that sort of thing, that is not the time. Because if your body has a stress response going on, it feels as though it is in immediate danger, and therefore it is not going to have any of the functions going on that bring another life into this world. And so what you need is to reduce the stress functions in order to allow all of that traffic, if you like, to start flowing again. So there are lots of different types of stress. We've got everyday stress. I'm not just talking about the food that we eat, but the environmental pollution, the toxins in our food and in our water, the digital toxicity, the constant stimulation and stress by phones pinging and by lights flashing, or the television screen, or iPads, or you might have a plan, you might have a busy day thinking, right, I've got to get this and this done, and then other things get in the way. So all of this contributes to the toxic load in our body. Stress isn't just about having an argument or a grumpy boss. Stress is physical as well. You know, your body has to somehow process the heavy metals that come in. If you eat fish that hasn't been well farmed, maybe it's got the mercury in salmon, for example, in Scotland. Well, when that happens, your body has to be able to process that mercury. It has to be able to get heavy metals out of the system somehow. And that forms part of the stress, part of the toxic load that's going on within your body. So usually, this is what's going on behind the scenes. But by the time I see people in the clinic, they're coming in complaining of specific ailments that you may not think are linked to each other normally, and you may not think that they're particularly linked to stress, because individually a lot of these symptoms aren't something that you would go to the doctor with. They make you feel rubbish, but you wouldn't go and say, oh, you know what, I've got a bit of a headache. Or unless it's really bad, you wouldn't go to the doctor with heartburn, although lots of people mention that when they get to the doctor, and that's why there's so many people on omeprazole now. You wouldn't go to the doctor saying, oh, well, you know, I feel a bit out of breath, I'm breathing rapidly all the time, and I've got palpitations. I'm not having a heart attack. I don't feel like I'm having a heart attack. There's no tightness in the chest, but, you know, I notice when I lie down in the evening that my heart's pounding a little bit. And then you might start to notice that you perhaps would have expected to get pregnant, but it's not happening, and you just think, oh, it's taking a bit longer than usual. Or men, erectile dysfunction is very, very typical of stress overload. The more there's a problem with erectile dysfunction, then the more stressed you get, and the more stressed you get with the stress hormones going on, the more likely there is to be a problem with erectile dysfunction. Women may start to notice that they miss periods, so they might think they're pregnant, but then find out that they're not. So again, there's very typical gynecological irregularities, let's put it that way. People then notice that their mood is affected. It's one thing feeling a bit stressed, but then over time people will start to feel a bit low, and their sleep will start to be affected. And they'll just say, oh yeah, it's just stress. You know, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning just because I'm a bit anxious, but it'll be fine. It'll go away. And then there's, of course, they get a bug because their immune system is weakened. And they say, well, everybody gets a bug at this time of year. It's no big deal. What they may not be noticing, but could come to light later on in tests, is that their blood sugar is rising because, of course, their body's got to get the energy from somewhere to feed this fight or flight response. And then their blood pressure may be increasing. And although some people get a headache with high blood pressure, the standard line from GPs is that high blood pressure is asymptomatic. You don't get any warning when that starts happening. So some of these symptoms can be happening kind of a little bit secretively, things going wrong in your body before you get any really serious overt manifestation of it. You might have a bit of a stomach ache, just a bit of digestive problems. Some people will start to get IBS, which is a bit of a non-diagnosis, but any problem in your GI tract that leads to pain or diarrhea followed by constipation, anything like that will be labelled as IBS. But actually it's the digestive enzymes that are being affected. It's this metabolism slowing down. There's a whole raft of things that are already going on by the time you've got your symptoms. And then people will have a low sex drive. Often that's linked to being tired, and they'll just use that as an excuse and just say, sorry, I'm just too tired tonight. But actually their sex drive is low anyway. The men might have erectile dysfunction, and so that can then have a knock-on effect onto the relationship itself, which can then start leading to depression or arguments or unspoken arguments where there's just an atmosphere, which then increases the stress. So again, we've got another vicious circle going on. And with all of that, of course, is the tension that we feel in our muscles, because our muscles are ready for fight or flight. And so they've got to be in a state of alertness. But really, this is what patients experience and what they'll come to me and say. So they'll say, well, I've got a bit of this and a bit of that, but nothing specific and nothing that I'm going to go to the doctor with as a named problem. So where they tell me that, I'm looking at another system of the body called the HPA Axis. Because what I need to know is what's happening inside your body to the hormones, to the nutrients, and to your energy levels, to your sleep patterns, so your circadian rhythms. And all you need to know really, the important part of this slide, is the hypothalamus at the top is the area of your brain that's kind of the early warning system. The hypothalamus triggers everything else into action. It tells the pituitary gland, yikes, I'm in immediate danger, quick, do something. The pituitary gland then sends a message down to the adrenal glands, which sits on top of your kidneys, and say, quick, get me out of here, we are in danger. And your kidneys send the adrenaline around your body and the cortisol around your body, preparing it to run away or to stand and fight its ground. Now, at some point, we need to break this cycle of dis-ease if it's not what is needed at the time. Okay, so the HPA axis is involved in nearly every physiological and metabolic process in the body, and it influences the function within every cell of the body. So the state of the HPA axis has to be considered in all health conditions, particularly chronic ones, and especially if you've got something going wrong where you've got lots of different niggles, but nothing is really getting to the bottom of it. Now, this is where I'm going to explain a little bit about functional medicine and Chinese medicine compared with Western medicine. So I would certainly like to extend my thanks to Dan Kalish for this slide because he explains it beautifully. In functional medicine and in Chinese medicine, we have 3 levels of dysfunction, if you like. We've got level 1, which is the root cause. What has gone wrong? What caused all of this to suddenly start happening? So that could be a shock in your life, it could be a trauma, an injury, an illness, the death of a loved one, it could be divorce, something that comes along in your life that's particularly difficult to cope with and needs an immediate response. And the root causes may even go back to childhood, even if all the symptoms don't present until adult life. So then level 2, we've got the body systems, and that includes the HPA axis that I was just describing. What are the systems going on in the body, and how are they disrupted? And then level 3, we've got the symptoms. So this is the real difference between functional medicine and Western medicine, because when you go and visit a GP and you explain your symptoms, really you're talking about level 3, and the GP is responding at level 3. So if you go and say, I feel depressed and I feel very low and I can't sleep, your GP will give you antidepressants and sleeping tablets. If you say, I have a headache, your GP will give you painkillers. But at all times, this is just addressing the symptoms. You're not addressing the body systems, and you're certainly not addressing the root cause and the emotional side of things, the spiritual side of things, the social side of things. All of this comes together to affect your quality of life, and yet the GP focuses on level 3, and that's why I believe that Western medicine is wonderful at acute conditions or at life-saving things. There's no doubt that that Western medicine, it can perform miracles when it comes to life-saving procedures. But if you have a chronic illness or an illness that is not getting better by itself or responding to anything your GP has done, then surely we've got to look at the body systems and find out what's gone out of balance. When did it go out of balance, and how can we coax it back into balance? And so by testing the body systems, by testing the HPA axis and measuring your hormonal levels, that's the way we can see what's going on internally that's giving rise to your symptoms. So the way we do this at Barefoot Medicine is look at various lab tests that can be done either through saliva or urine or stool. We don't use blood tests. And so with this test, for example, we can do HPA axis lab testing. And that will tell us how far down the line you are with your stress levels. How serious has this become? Can it be nudged back on track, or do you really need a proper intensive program if it's been going on a long time? We will then offer therapeutic and nutritional interventions that can moderate the effects of the stress to break this cycle. So we don't want to stop the cycle altogether. You do have to have a stress response, but only up to the point that it is still serving you. But sometimes we need to break that fear mechanism and teach your body that actually it's okay. You don't need to be stressed. You don't need to be hyper responsive to a small stimulus. So somebody might just laugh too loud and then you'll jump because you'll think, what was that? And you can become hypersensitized to anything that deviates from the norm. Now, there are lots of tests that you can have done, but if we look at the overall stress profile, there's a basic one that anybody can have done, but then there's different aspects you can add to that, still just with a salivary test, if your main focus is, for example, fertility and why you're not falling pregnant, or if you've got digestive problems like IBS that aren't being addressed. And if you just don't know what's wrong and you want an overall health check, maybe it's an annual health check, or maybe you've got a condition that's completely not responding to anything, then I would recommend the full HPA stress profile, because that will have 6 salivary tests in it. And then we can also check for various other hormones as well. So let's have a quick look at one of these tests so you can get a more detailed idea of what it is. So this particular one is the full spectrum test just for stress. Okay, so each of these nodules, you'll see there's 6 of them there. That's each time somebody does a saliva test, and the cortisol in the saliva is being measured. So the top line tells you the upper average limit and the bottom line tells you the lower average. And then the middle line is this fictitious patient. So once we see not just the shape of the graph it's making, but the levels, then we can see that the cortisol is particularly bad. So in this person, round about midday, instead of their cortisol levels coming down, they're shooting up much higher than they should be. So that tells me that they're particularly stressed in the afternoon. Maybe this is a day they're at work, or that, their stress has gradually built up throughout the morning. So we can start to build up a profile of what's going on for that person mentally and emotionally by looking at what hormones are being given off. And so this is the cortisol awakening response. That tells you when you wake up in the morning, you do the saliva test when you wake up, and half an hour later and an hour after waking up. And then we look at how quickly you wake up. Do you feel refreshed and vibrant, or does it take you a long time to get going? The cortisol to DHEA ratio is really, really important for many purposes, because DHEA is one of the master hormones, particularly when it comes to fertility hormones, for the estrogens and progesterone. So we want to look at the ratio between those hormones to see what's going on in the body. And then the other thing we can test, of course, is all the estrogens and progesterone, and so all your hormones related to conception, fertility, menopause, anything like that. We can measure all of those hormones to see where you're up to. Just as an aside here, you can see where it says female, you've got follicular phase, mid-cycle, luteal phase, and postmenopausal. There is a test that you can have done specifically where you do a saliva test every day of the month, and then you send it off, and we look at your hormone levels throughout the month, so we can see whether you're ovulating or all sorts of imbalances there. So that's a separate test that we can do. But I still recommend starting with the cortisol level, because if we can get the HPA axis right, a lot of other things will right themselves anyway. The other thing I wanted to shoot down to here is melatonin, because melatonin is an important hormone to measure in anybody who's having any sort of sleep difficulties, because it's exactly the opposite, the same scale but opposite of cortisol. So in the morning, your cortisol level shoots up really high to wake you up. and your melatonin level should sink really low because you don't need to go to sleep at that time. So if you imagine them as waves on a graph, the cortisol and the melatonin should be doing exactly the opposite to each other, and that's what gives us our circadian rhythms, our daily rhythm, our body clock, whatever you want to call it. And when we have a regular body clock, we also have regular digestive patterns, regular sleeping patterns, and all the body's systems tend to fall into a natural flow, whether it's the menstrual cycle, or whether it's your intellectual ability, of course, because, do you get tired after you've had a big meal? Do you go to meetings in an afternoon and have quite a lull and not take in anything because you've just had your lunch? All sorts of things like that we can measure with this. And then finally, we've got the secretory IGA, which can be measured. That's another good indicator to tell us whether or not you've got digestive problems going on, or whether it could be an acute condition, could be IBS, it could be an issue with leaky gut and the intestinal barrier, all sorts of things like that. Food intolerances is another one. So we look at the secretory IGA to see if that's wrong, if that's out of balance, then we would look to do a full digestive enzyme screening, and we'd look at all the nutrients, the lipids, and how your body's processing that. But again, it begins with the cortisol and the HPA Axis test, because that can point us in the right direction. So overall, I think you can see that a functional medicine or a Chinese medicine approach is to use what modern science has to offer. Let's do these tests, but let's then interpret them in a way that looks at your overall well-being. And all of this whole wellness wheel goes towards helping you to be awake, alert and functioning when you need to be, but to balance that with the right amount of downtime and with the right amount of warning to your system that it needs to wake up and be alert, and now it needs to go to sleep. And all of this, when it's in balance, gives us a good circadian rhythm. So once we've looked at all of that and you've had your tests, we've got the results, what are the options that are available to you? Well, there's a 30-day online stress management course that you can take from anywhere in the world. There are nutritional supplements that will be highly tailored to the results of your test. These aren't going to be the sort of supplements that you can get across the counter. They will be tailored to the very specific things that are showing up on your test. Now, which nutritional supplements are available does depend upon which country you're in. So, for example, in America, people would take a tiny amount of hormonal supplements, whereas in the UK, that's not allowed. So we would look at different options with that. Could be that you do a nutritional detoxification program with us, where we do a liver detox and we cleanse your system. So at Barefoot Medicine, we've got a whole program of that, where you get a recipe book, weekly phone calls to support you through it, and nutritional supplements that are suitable for vegans. And it's really just encapsulated fruit, vegetables and berries, so you get the basics of a good, healthy diet, and we put together a whole 4-month program for you with that. Another option is Chinese herbal medicines, where I would make a bespoke prescription for you. And a lot of the time with this sort of thing, with a stress profile, I would look at adaptogenic herbs. They are plant-based substances that can help your body adapt when you're in a stressful situation. So to make a smoother transition, rather than the panic and the sense of urgency, sometimes we just need to take a breath and stop and process things. And that's when our body can adapt correctly. So there are certain herbs that will help you to do that, and there's nutrition, there's a diet plan that can help you to do that as well. And finally, for those who are able to get to Dinas Powys in Wales, I have an acupuncture clinic where I treat this sort of thing all the time, very successfully with acupuncture, because of the way the Chinese look at the body. And so there's a whole raft of options we can do, and this functional medicine approach or Chinese medicine approach seems to be the best way of combining modern science and modern technology and the amazing lab testing that can be done with the ancient wisdom of looking after our body, of listening to our body, and of balancing everything so that when stress comes along, we can deal with it appropriately and then move on in a healthy way. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed for your time. If you would like to do any of these lab tests, then please go and look at barefootmedicine.co.uk, where you'll see detailed information about the different types of tests you can have depending on what your main health complaint is. And in fact, you'll be able to order the testing kits online as well. And that will be, again, a complete package so that you will be sent the testing kit, the test tubes, full instructions of how to take a salivary test or a urine test or a stool sample. You'll then send those testing kits away, and the company that deals with it will update my web portal with them, and they're called BioHealth, and I will be able to go online and have a look at your report, and then I will speak to you on the phone or in person or via Skype, or write a detailed report for you explaining what it means and what you can do from here. So thank you once again. My name's Simone Buna, and you can contact me or order the tests at barefootmedicine.co.uk.